Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you, Diksha, for doing this with me. And to those of you who are here, thank you to you. I will be reading my short story, Tomboy, and I'll read for a couple of minutes. He was the only boy I knew who didn't want to drive his own car. Muttering under his breath, he'd reverse it in a halting zigzag from the driveway. And as soon as we were on the road, I'd slip into the driver's seat. We were 16 when I bashed up the SUV his father bought him, my stoned face frozen in an uncomprehending smile as Zara Ijaz looked on in horror. He took the blame. All those hours we spent playing Street Fighter 2. I think of them now as a childish rehearsal for what our lives would become. Zara was always Chun-Li, a vixen in a puffy blue dress, forever flipping her legs in combat. I was Blanca, the wild green man from the jungle, likely to win, but not without taking major hits. After my father left us, I was 16, my sisters 10 and 8. Mama began to lean on Zara's parents in a style they seemed to welcome. The rich like looking after the less rich, so long as they look rich enough to blend into their parties. Which Mama did, of course, offering herself up for every kind of service, from handmaid to boon companion to sounding board. Our mothers had been best of friends for 3 decades. Their whole cohort had carried over from school. Look at these two, Auntie Maliha, the most lethal of the friends, used to say when Zarar and I got in line to cut the cake at his overblown birthday parties. The odd couple. You two should marry each other. Say inshallah, I bared my teeth. Zarar would scold me for fighting with Mama. If I wax your mustache with my own hands, you won't feel a thing, he pleaded. His curling fat hands reminded me of the mesh washing sponge in our kitchen, but I didn't tell him this. One day, before Zarar could intervene, Mama bullied me into dyeing my upper lip blonde with Jolene bleach. When I burnt myself by wrecking the proportions of powder and bleach, Mama said it was because I showed no interest in such things. She was mother enough to splatter egg white over my mouth. She struggled on her librarian's salary at the private school where my sisters and I were enrolled on a discounted fee. Papa had moved to Doha, where we heard he worked as an overseer on a large royal estate. Auntie Maliha said, "Overseer means driver, manager, what?" Papa had been general manager at a nice hotel in Karachi. After the hotel shuttered, he moved to Qatar, but he didn't take us with him. We learned the bitter truth in bits and dribbles. There was a Malaysian involved, a woman he'd met at a shopping mall. He didn't even think of his daughters, Mama said, casually smearing us with her grief while giving my anger the ignition it had always wanted. A few weeks after Papa left Pakistan, our landlord stood in his vest and shalwar at the base of his stairs below our sea view apartment, a toothpick dangling from his pink mouth, and demanded advance rent. Mama's face sank into silence. Some financial problems, I said, sliding down the stairs, though we had no financials and a ton of problems. Later that week, Zarar's father, Uncle Pervez, transferred money into Mama's account and told her it was what brothers did for their sisters. Zarar and my teenage years drifted in a haze of smoking hash in his bathroom, 7 a.m. breakfasts of aloo chana, late night parties where I stayed sober so Zarar could get drunk and I could drive him home. Uncle Pervez worried about his son. Why doesn't Zarar take an interest in sports? I would get asked. Why doesn't he have any male friends? What is this obsession with sketching Madonna? I assured Uncle Pervez that Zarar was too smart for the girls he went to school with, that he would join his father's textile business when the time was right. I could blather like that with Uncle P because we had a good rapport, like the proverbial king and vizier or some other faux fraternal bond. It never occurred to me that he might be looking out for his own interests, all the while grooming me to share his burden. I tried to hide it, but the 2 years Zarar was away in New York, I was restless, empty. I had gotten used to being in his house, hanging with auntie and uncle like they were my own parents, driving Zarar's SUV like it was my chariot, devouring the imported Bursa cheese from their fridge, tossing chunks of it into my mouth without toast, licking the silver foil clean. With Zarar away, I began to drift.
Thank you so much, Mira. Not only is your writing wonderful, but your reading so obviously betrays your performing side of you as well. So, first of all, okay, I have so many questions, but I want to
Yes.
start with the fact that you sort of returned from Wellesley and all the other credentials that Michael mentioned at the beginning to start acting. So, could you tell us a bit about your journey from acting to writing and what sort of led to the origin story, if you will, of this wonderful collection?
Thank you for your very Diksha kind words about the book. The book is obviously out today, so I'm nervous, and this book was in my head for so many years, and now it's out in the world, and let's see how people receive it. But basically, when I was at the Wall Street Journal, I kind of used to feel an ennui when I was there, not my first year, but my second year, because I realized that I was editing book reviews and I was happy on the face of it. My parents were very happy. I was an editor at the Wall Street Journal, but it didn't fulfill me. And I realized very early on that this was good for the time being, but this is not really what I want to be doing with my life, editing book reviews. And I like performing. I've been a mimic all my life. And so at the age of 24, 25, I thought to myself, I actually really want to be an actor. And the writing, of course, I've been writing since I was 16 years old, and I did writing at Wellesley, so I already had that. And so then I quit my job at the Wall Street Journal and moved back home and jumped into acting. And the acting has actually been instrumental in inspiring me and in making my world come alive. Because when I'm in Karachi and when I'm on a set, and you know this because you've been an actor, there are people from all walks of life, and they're all in this. We don't have a studio, so we typically rent a house and we kind of shoot inside a house. And you have your makeup artist, you have the director, you have actors. And in Pakistan, they come from all across Pakistan. So you have all people from all walks of life. And I find myself most alive when I'm on a set. My pores are open. I'm listening to the sounds around me. And that actually, the first story I started writing was Breezy Blessings. I had done my first drama serial, and actresses, and again, you'll probably know this, actresses often develop a very close relationship with the makeup artist, especially if he's a guy, because he's sort of gossip, he's sort of running around you, all day with his makeup, and you develop a camaraderie very quickly. And I remember when that shoot ended, I went home, I went back to Lahore. I was living with my parents, and I had an image in my head. And I started writing the story, but I emailed it to myself because I didn't have a book in mind, but I said to myself, oh, I want to write a short story. And then I just sent an email to myself. And that's basically how the first story came about. And then the others followed. But it was a very natural kind of process. And the acting very much inspired the me being alive to this world outside of my own life.
And that's also evident in your dialogue. It's so authentic. It's so obvious that somebody who sort of works with written dialogue, and that comes across on the page and makes your stories come alive. But why short stories? I mean, I read short stories. I respect the art of the short story, and I don't want to dismiss things by saying, "Oh, I wish this had been a novel." That's too simplistic. I think this collection works really well as short stories, but I wonder what made you choose that instead of a novel, and if, and this is selfish, you are working on a novel.
It's actually quite a boring answer. I was very young when I started writing these stories. I was, 25, and I didn't have a huge amount of life experience. I went to college, then I had a job at the Wall Street Journal, and then I went to Pakistan and became an actor. And I thought to myself, these are the stories I want to tell. It wasn't on a huge scope. I think with the novel, you genuinely have to have a big story to tell. And as you said, and I appreciate what you said, these are meaningful short stories. And I think that at the time that I started writing them, this was the only thing that seemed this was the only thing that genuinely seemed that I could grasp. I didn't have a huge idea. And so these tiny stories, as they came about very organically, then I started writing them and I thought, oh, I should write a collection of short stories. It wasn't like, oh, I prefer the form of the short story, and so I'm not going to write a novel. That's just the honest answer. I didn't have a huge amount of life experience, and the life experience that I did have, I channeled it into short fiction. And I also didn't have an MFA. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because I actually am quite glad that I didn't have an MFA, because I think a lot of the raw energy that my stories have, I don't know if it works in every single story, but I felt very unself-conscious when I wrote these stories, because I wasn't workshopping them. I remember when I was at Wellesley, we used to workshop stories when I was an undergraduate. And I always felt like I'd had to then explain things a lot to my fellow readers. And when I wrote this collection, I was writing it, just entirely on my own in a vacuum. And that's how the book came about.
So that's interesting you say that. And I have, along those lines, when you were writing, did you at any point think of an audience, a Pakistani audience, a South Asian audience, a diaspora audience, an international? Did that cross your mind? Or at what point? I mean, at some point, obviously, it has to, because today's pub date. So
Yeah.
today it does. But at what point did the audience awareness come in for you?
I think when I had a publisher, and when I thought that this was actually going to be a real thing that was going to be out in the world one day. I think before that, I was just writing for myself, really. I was inspired by the characters that were popping into my head, and I was sort of just taking them and running with them. And it's funny because, writing these books, you create a series of problems that you then have to solve yourself. And that was very much my process of writing this. I would, you have an image, and then the image expands to build a universe. And then you suddenly find yourself thinking, oh no, I have to actually now solve all of these problems. And I think after I had a publisher, I thought to myself, okay, this is real. Who will want to read this stuff? And because I had been an editor at the Wall Street Journal, I was very aware that I was aware of what I didn't want to do. So I was very aware of not wanting to write explanatory literature. I was very aware of not wanting to explain things to people in a way that would make it easier for them. You've obviously been witness to this as well. After 9/11, I think there was a huge demand from the West to have writers from, say, India, Pakistan, or Afghanistan explain our part of the world to the West. Right. And it became a bit of a cottage industry, with writers answering questions like, why do they hate us? And I never wanted to do that. I wanted to tell very real stories of real people. And I wanted to tell stories of, complex identities. So yeah.
Unsurprisingly, Mira, you're leading me to the questions that I had in mind anyway, because I feel we've had such parallel experiences, not just in our lives, but in our literary careers. Yours right now at the start. So a lot of what you're talking about, the Pakistan that you write about resembles the India that I know and write about, right? Which is not, like you said, the one that's been carefully packaged for the West in the past.
Right.
It's neither sort of the poor kids with their big smiles, and nor is it the nervous diaspora, the nervous immigrants. And, so there is this huge, vast space that, at least when I was writing The Windfall, it felt like there's no possible way that this will translate beyond South Asia. Mm-hmm. Or possibly the diaspora, maybe not even that. How have you felt about the fact that you are writing something that is, to me, a neighboring Indian, the world that we know, but at the same time, were the conversations different that you had with your editors in America versus, I don't know where you started first? Is it out already in Pakistan?
No, it's going to be out in May, at the end of May.
I'm curious about what the different conversations have been. I know in London we share an editor sort of along the way. What have the cultural differences been in the conversations across countries?
In terms of editing the book?
In terms of just the response, in terms of expectations and response, has it been, oh, you need to explain this, you need to italicize this, you need to have, an asterisk and the
right
note about it. How has the conversation differed? Have you been pleasantly surprised, or at any point have you been annoyed with the conversation?
Thank you for asking that. I mean, I think initially, initially I did struggle a little bit with, I think I myself started then explaining things a little bit when occasionally I found that some of my editors early on weren't understanding, say, the humor, right? And then I found myself clarifying and explaining, and then I actually pulled back because I thought to myself, this is clarity, too much clarity in fiction actually ruins mood, right? This is, I'm not writing like a pamphlet. I'm writing something that is really, it's kind of ambivalent and mischievous. And then I think I remember actually having a conversation with my then editor. My editor's changed at some point, saying that, you know, they're just trying to be funny, and I can make it a little more overt, but I don't want to break it down. And then my editor said, no, you should absolutely do what you have to do, because you know these people, and you should just go with it. My British editor Faiza, who she was always very much in favor of just not explaining anything. She hosts a podcast called Browned Off, and in it, because I've been listening to it, she's often talking about how people don't, in the West, you don't describe a donut and then say a donut, comma, a deep fried sweet, like dough-shaped, ring-shaped sweet. You never do that because, of course, there's a history and people know what donuts are. But we often say things like charpai, comma, a rope-strung bed. Now, that's, so you do struggle with, you do struggle with things like that. And I tried really hard in this book to not do that. And I actually suspect that I'll probably lose quite a few readers, and they'll be kind of maybe frustrated because there are a ton of Urdu words in my book that I haven't footnoted. I've seen a lot of books in contemporary fiction that are footnoting things, but I didn't, because I just thought, it's going to take you a second in Google to figure this out. So I trust that the people who will read this will be interested enough to do a little bit, if they're uncertain, they'll do a little search and they'll have the answers. But I think basically, Diksha, I think subjectivity is very important, right? I think we live in an age which is drenched with data, and the only thing that now stands out is your own subjective, authentic take on things. And I've tried to be as subjective as possible, and I've tried to channel my characters' subjectivities so that they are alive and real to the world.
I hope Faiza's watching, because I think it's so accurate, or that she does watch this at some point, because I think the conversations that Faiza has, including the podcast that she spoke to your aunt Moni on recently, I think Faiza has saved several of us writers, and as a result, many readers from that sort of dreadfully dull explanation and sort of education about South Asia, as it were. And I think that's a lot of gratitude to Faiza for doing that. Which is wonderful. So it's coming out in Pakistan in May. So I'm reversing the question now.
Okay.
How do you feel about that? Are you nervous? Are you worried? I mean, that's home country, right? I mean, it's a different terrain. How do you feel about that?
I think folks in Pakistan will really get the work, because it's chatty in the way that they are chatty. It's chatty in the way that I am chatty and you are chatty. And I think they will get it. And a lot of people here actually in the US are already getting it, which is amazing, because we now live in a very small world, and people, because of Netflix and TV shows and Indian matchmaking, people have things to reference, and they know cultures, and they're able to make that imaginative leap if you push them just a little bit. But I'm super excited about Pakistan, because I think a lot of young people, I want young people to read this and say, oh, you know what, this is kind of sort of my dilemma. A lot of young people in Pakistan struggle with notions of identity, because we live in a state that has a very fixed notion of who we should be. But a lot of the aspirational young people in Pakistan have their own ideas of how they want to be. So in many ways, we have 3 layers of identity operating in Pakistan. You have the abstract laws of the state, the Pakistani state. Then you have the often burdensome imperatives of family and your aunts and uncles and parents and clan and tribe. And then you have a young person with a smartphone in his or her hand, navigating these above mentioned rules while also trying to stay true to who they are. And I think my book is really about people figuring out, hustling and improvising through different identities, and being surrounded by other people's notion and society's notion of who they should be, and kind of very, very aware of that, but still trying to improvise an identity that is true to them, and often failing, but trying really hard to have, without necessarily asserting that identity, still navigating through it. The irony of that, right? The paradox of maybe not being able to verbalize your identity, like in the story Tomboy, we have two queer people. They're not able to verbalize their identities to their parents, but they're still navigating them. And that's tragic, and kind of I think my book is about the pathos of lives like those.
How do you navigate that in a personal way? Because you just had that lovely article in Vogue about sort of straddling these two worlds, and I believe you said you're married to a non-Pakistani Pakistani. It's very funny because Bilal lives in San Francisco.
Yes.
And it's funny because it's sort of the mirror image of me where I'm married to a white man who works in Bombay.
Oh, wow.
So I'm curious how you navigate that on an interpersonal relationship level and personally straddling these two countries.
Yeah, it's been hard. You read my Vogue piece, so you know it's been super hard. I'm very determined to hold on to my work, which is the acting, which allows me tremendous freedom and really makes me come alive. And so after I got married, of course, I have to also come and spend time with my husband. And so a lot of my aunts and family members said, just go and be with him and take a theater class in San Francisco. And I wanted to say, honey, like John, Meri John, taking a theater class in San Francisco is very different from doing active work that I have spent 8 years building a career doing. And I can't just go and take a theater class and just be fulfilled by it overnight. So there are those conversations. But in terms of straddling Pakistan and the US, I mean, it's during the pandemic, we were separated for 3 months. There was no work. So I was just at home kind of with my dogs. And then I went and worked in Karachi for 3 months, and then came to see Bilal. So, we got married 1.5 years ago. So it's still early days. I'm still coming and going, and it's really difficult, but I'm still doing it because I know that if I don't work, if I don't act, and if I don't write, I know I will be a miserable person to be with, and nobody wants that. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of back and forth.
Mira, I'm being nudged to allow others to ask questions, but before I do that, I want to ask what you're currently reading or enjoying.
I just finished reading Homeland Elegies by Ayad Akhtar, which I actually really enjoyed. Again, he's grappling with questions of identity, but he's a Pakistani American and he grew up in America. So his take is very different. He's sort of grappling with them from America. And it's very interesting to see kind of his own questions that come up for him, because it's sort of a hybrid memoir novel. I read Department of Speculation by Jenny Ophil a couple of months ago that I really loved, because I thought it was wry and tender, but also kind of very sharp and smart. And I really like, sometimes when women write about homes and marriages, we get relegated to the realm of domestic fiction. And Jenny really kind of, showed us that, she wrote a really, really smart book dealing with these very real issues about guilt and infidelity. So those are the 2 books that I've really enjoyed recently.
Well, Mira, your book is wonderful. It's really, truly a wonderful collection.
And Diksha, may I just say, sorry, but I also really enjoyed this book, which I actually just finished reading. And I wanted to say to you very quickly, sorry for interrupting you, that you are a comic genius. And thank you for writing this. I laughed out loud so many times when I read this book.
Thank you. That is my goal achieved. And so there's some really great questions coming up that I want to get to. I also want to tell the people watching that our coincidences, our sort of parallel lives, India, Pakistan, America, go far before you and I ever connected, which is that your husband showed my father around Lahore.
He did.
15 years ago? Something
yes.
Like a long time ago, right?
Yeah, it was like 15, 20 years ago.
So quite a few connections, and I wish we could have done this in person and actually chatted much more at length. I hope we can soon. But I'm going to ask a few questions, some of which are actually, fortunately, questions that I had on my own list. So Mahmoud Shafiq wants to know if there's a movie or a series in the works.
Not that I know of yet.
Well, I think we can keep our fingers crossed, Mahmoud. What do you think? Do you think, is there any, well, maybe you don't want to answer this, but.
Well, I actually think my short story Tomboy lends itself
the best to the screen?
Which story?
And no, is there any? And you know what? Actually, our
Oh,
readers haven't necessarily read it yet. So, but just do you see this in some form or the other making its way to the screen? And if so, how would you hope your involvement would be?
I actually think my story, Tomboy, which is my only story written in the first person, lends itself quite well to kind of a screenplay or the screen, and I would love to work on it. But again, I don't know how to write a
When you say
screenplay.
work on it, you mean act, right? Produce? What part of it?
I do everything. Just kidding. I think I'd love to give a go at writing screenplay. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Okay, Mira, you spoke about explaining the story concept to the editor as they do not fully understand the humor, innovation, creativity. As an author, what should we essentially do if we have to get the book published?
If somebody's asking what they should do if they want their
I
book to be
suppose so. I
published.
think get someone that saying that you had to have conversations with your editor where they do not necessarily understand parts of the humor or innovation in your writing. And as another author, what should we essentially do if we have to get the book published? Mira, I'm really glad you're on the receiving end of this question
Yeah.
and not me because
Well, just I think, there's so much fear and uncertainty when one is writing anything on one's own. I certainly was writing in the dark, and before I had an editor, and I thought to myself, I just have no idea if anybody is going to understand this. And you just have to really be honest with yourself and write honestly about the characters that you love and that are in your head wanting to come out, and then hopefully somebody will notice that. And of course you have to hustle and kind of do all of that. That's a whole other thing, but just stay true to the voice in your head that is coming out, and don't pander.
don't pandas, excellent. Yeah. Mira, Aisha Iqbal wants to know if you find the scripts that you act in sexist. And would you
Sexist.
sexist? Yes.
it's a
And would you
really
write a drama yourself?
it's a really thoughtful question, and one I've actually answered before as well. Some of the scripts are deeply problematic, and a couple of years ago I turned down 3 or 4 scripts, and suddenly I found myself not getting any work. I wasn't on the screen for 2 years, and I thought to myself, oh my god, like if I'm making these moral decisions around not appearing in these scripts, but this is all there is. But then I held my ground, and then something else came along, and it's hard. Like, it's really hard when you believe in certain things, and the production houses are just not there yet. So I would like to. I'm not fluent in Urdu in the way that I am in English creatively, so I don't think I can write a script in Urdu. But I would love to kind of work on a script with other people, and I hope that the industry is I hope that things get better in Pakistan, although we have a long way to go.
I want to digress a bit and ask a
Yeah.
personal question actually about the Pakistani industry because obviously I've had experience in the Indian industry and I know you're currently working there, so you have to be careful with your answer. I have the freedom of not working there anymore.
Yeah.
What's it like? What are your frustrations? How much can you
I
say?
mean,
What's it like?
it's we've it's funny because some of the best writing that came out of Pakistan, and therefore some of the best dramas that came out, were at a time when there was tremendous repression in Pakistan in the 80s. We had these wonderful dramas where the heroines were lively and strong and playful. And now our heroines are just weeping on screen. And it's hard. Because they don't see me as somebody who will weep on screen, so I don't get cast. A producer once said to me, Mira ji, the best type of casting is typecasting. And I remember sitting there thinking, okay, so I don't get those weeping roles because they don't see me in those roles, but those are the only real roles out there. And it's very frustrating. And I'm constantly having conversations with heads of production to say, write strong female characters, just write about the reality of lived Pakistani experience without constantly kind of saying that, you must. Diksha, it's a really long and complicated kind of answer, but the central premise of many Pakistani dramas is that if you're quiet or if you're patient, then you will get through a lot of hardship. And that is the message that is encouraged. And, there are a lot of women now who are stepping forward, producers, and saying, no, you should also stand up for yourself. But it's, the conversation has a really, really long way to go. It's not really, yeah.
Yeah, I hope it's a conversation we can have someday in private.
Yeah.
Mira, I don't know if you're I don't know, this is like being asked which is your favorite child, but which one of your stories is your favorite? Which one resonates with you the most? Ask Aisha Rahman.
They keep changing, Aisha. So I, you know, I I think the three stories that I'm currently really liking are A Life of Its Own, Tomboy, and Are You Enjoying? The title story. Yeah.
Um, Mira Niba Ahmed wants to know that she says she's so excited for you to be launching this side of your writing. My question is, who are your top Pakistani South Asian writers that you would recommend to young women?
I really, really like the short stories of Danial Moinuddin in Other Rooms, Other Wonders. I think it is a stunning collection. And just at the level of the sentence, I think he is one of our most superior prose stylists. And I read that book to be awed by his sentences. Vis-a-vis young women, I don't quite know, what young women should be reading, but I really liked Kamala Shamsi's last book, Home Fire. I thought it was I sort of read it in 5 hours. I thought it was a very compelling book. So read that.
And I'm just going to add to that everybody should read Moni Mohsin's books,
Yes.
because I think she paved the way for so much wonderful literature and just does it so well. Manal, I hope I'm saying that right, wants to know, this is a lovely question. What most surprised you about the process of writing your first book, whether about the writing technique and process itself or yourself?
I think one thing that I learned was that it's so, and I don't want to sound romantic when I say this because the process is not romantic, but what I learned was that it is such a mysterious process. I'm not the kind of writer who says, oh, I really would like to discuss class dynamics in Pakistan, and so I'm going to write a short story about class dynamics. I'm the kind of writer who is inspired by an image or a quirk in a certain someone. I go to a dinner party and I see an auntie behaving a certain way, and that stays with me. And then I come home and I start writing. And I think what surprised me in this process was that you create a ton of problems that then, like I said earlier, you have to solve. And it is difficult. And you then have to you have to be okay with a lot of uncertainty. And the amount of times I rewrote these stories, I would think to myself, okay, I think this is done. And then suddenly a character was not seeming right in a particular place and would want to go somewhere else. And so fundamentally being okay with certainty in creative processes, I think I learned a lot about that. And yeah. Yeah.
Mira, someone wants to know, do you think we should blame the Pakistani housewives for the kinds of drama that are being nowadays? Because I don't think that's the kind of stories that even they enjoy.
We should blame them for the kinds of dramas that we're seeing. Not at all. They poor things don't deserve any blame at all. If there's any blame to be ascribed, it's basically to money hungry producers, right? The producers are looking to make a quick buck, and they want stuff that sells, and they peddle the same stuff over and over again. So the problem is with the people who hold the reins of power. It's not with or I don't think it's necessarily with the audience. I think if you give your audience something good to watch, they will watch it.
Mira, Snehal Walia wants to know, how does someone she's a big admirer, first of all, and how does someone in her early 20s who loves writing deal with rejection? I can hardly imagine any of your books getting criticized or rejected, but I'd love to know what your take is on this. Does it happen with top writers like you as well?
Oh, honey, I got rejected. I got so many rejections, which I can talk about at some later stage. It's hard, and you have to have a lot of faith. All of this sounds so like I'm talking in the air, like have faith. But if you really love what you do, if you can't imagine being anything other than a writer, then I'm sure you will put words to paper and you will write something. And get in touch with me, if you want to send me some of your writing. And have a community of people. It can be friends. Send your stuff to people and just keep doing it. And you should really want to do it. That's the thing. Like if there are other things that you want to do in writing, it doesn't really, it doesn't, it's not, you're not consumed by it, then it's going to be hard for you. But if you're consumed by it, you will get through.
Careful, Mira, with that offer, your inbox is going to be flooded with.
Well, just to Sneha.
Mira, how did you pick a title and did you give input for the cover art?
Um, I think the title, after I had finished writing the collection, it was just seemed the most playful and the most sort of come hither title. And so I thought, okay, let's just go with it. Yes, I did give feedback after I saw this cover, and I liked the central premise of the sort of the veil or the bed sheet or whatever, the curtain being lifted, um, and a little bit feedback, and yeah, but not a huge amount.
Mira, I want to ask for myself. Maybe
Yes.
it's too early to do this, but what's next? Are you in terms of your writing? I know this is pub date. You don't want to think about it, but something brewing?
I have an idea that's kind of in my head. I haven't started writing it yet, but I think it involves a young woman. I think it involves a young woman in media in Pakistan, and I think it involves her navigating a very tricky situation. And what that's going to be, I will find out after I write the thing.